Hello again. So today I'm going to go over some bits for your hips and quads. Specifically, we're trying to look at what's called your lunge position. Okay, so obviously this covers lunges, split squats, running position, jerks, all things like that. Okay, so the way I like to break things down is into what's called like movement archetypes. Now, I mentioned in the last video about the book Becoming a Supple Leopard. They go over this concept in that book about sort of having different movement archetypes. I then went on to do like the Ready State Movement and Mobility 101 course and the 102, which expands on that quite a lot. So the basic concept is, having different positions that we break into sort of archetypes or different types. What you can do with that is like systematically break down quite complex movements into their individual parts. Say for instance, like, with a jerk, you've got the overhead position, you're in this lunge position here. We can take a look at that overhead position. We can take a look at that lunge position. And we can look at what the individual requirements are for each of those positions, see what's missing, and then work on either like the mobility that's needed for that or the motor control or skill element of that, okay? So I really like this way of doing things because, like I said, it just lets me take a little bit of a snapshot of someone. For example, I can look at someone's squat. I can see, is it the ankle, is it the hip? Is there some sort of like control issue where the knees are coming inwards? They haven't really got quite the balance or something like that. So it's a really good concept and a really good way of doing things. Now, if we look at, say, like the lunge position, like the lunge or run position, whatever one you prefer to call it, we have certain requirements for that. And like I said, whether you're in any of the positions I mentioned at the start, there's certain things that we're looking for, okay? So essentially the lunge position is any time your knee is behind your hip, yeah? So as you can see there, my knee is behind my hip, and this is what we call hip extension, okay? So in our lives, a lot of us, especially people who do office jobs, we sit in the car on the way to work, we sit at our desk all day, then we go home, we watch TV sitting on the sofa. Some people even go and do a cycle or spin class or something like that and spend even more time sort of in this, what's called flex position here. And we never really give ourselves an opportunity to really actually just open out our hips. As a result, there's a lot of stiffness and tightness here. And if you haven't got the hip extension there, this can start playing into like what's going on with your lower back, things like that, okay? So I'll give you an example now then. So like, obviously one of the requirements then, like I said, is knee behind the hip in full extension. And depending on what you're doing, obviously if you're doing a split squat, you can lean forward a little bit more. Some might argue against that a little bit, but we're obviously just trying to load up that leg. But anything sort of like there's a little, we're trying to stay quite upright really. And what we're also looking for is a brace neutral spine. Now, if this hip's really tight, it's gonna make it hard to stay upright and keep your spine in a neutral position. Something's going to have to give. Usually that would be a bit of arch in the lower back here. So, this plays into why you might be getting lower back pain. It might be that you're doing lunges, overhead lunges, stuff like that. So you've got a dumbbell up here and you're here and your lower back's extended. Of course, that's going to hurt your lower back. No amount of stretching or mobilizations is going to fix that lower back issue. The only thing that's going to fix it is fixing the movement, okay? So that's just one element of it. Also, other things that we're looking for is just nice and balanced. You can see my feet facing in a forward direction. We want my knee as I move, my knee wants to be tracking to the middle of my foot. I want to stay nice and balanced. Generally, what's going to happen here is I could lose balance by turning my hip out here. I could just not have control to keep my hips in a neutral position, and I'll just end up turning out here. And then we end up coming down in that position. The toe moves at a funny angle. That could end up with bunions, foot problems, all the rest of it. Okay, so nice and balanced, nice and upright. Brace neutral spine, knee behind the hip here, and a nice control of the movement as you come down here, not sort of tracking inwards or outwards or anything like that. So if we look at then, let's just say, for example, that you're missing hip extension here. As you're coming down here, you're having to bring your knees slightly forward, which is this is really common. People do the split squats. And like I said, we spend all day in that flex position, and then you get this one opportunity, like maybe you've got one exercise that's going to actually open out your hip, and you stand there and you lean forward and you do this, and you just keep your hip completely closed up, and then you wonder why you've got tight hips. So what we're looking for is just a little bit further out of here. If you was doing a jerk, you would come down into that position there, hips into extension, start to run on the spot, but if you're running, the hips going back there as well. So a good way to look at, what's going on with the hip is just to do a simple hip test. You can do this on what you'd want is like a wall or a sofa or couch if you're from the US. So, and what we're getting into is what's called like the couch stretch position. Hence why I mentioned couch. Okay, so what we're looking for here then is the shin to go vertical against the wall. We've got three positions that we can look at here. Okay, you can come into this position where the shin stays flat on the floor. Bring that forward here, and what we're looking for is a straight line going from your knee all the way to your shoulder there, okay? So if you can achieve that, that means you have full range of motion in your, your hip flexors or hip extenders, whatever you want to call them. So into that position. Now, when we then bring the leg up now, so you might have seen this is the common position here, you know, and this might not be the same every day. I have some days where I struggle a little bit here. Say I've been doing squats or something, my quads feeling a bit tight, I've got DOMs in my quads. It might be quite difficult to get in this position. But what we can see here now is that we're starting to bring the quads into the equation. Now, if you can't still, if you could do that before, and now you can't do that, it means that your quads are tight, and that's the limiting factor in this movement, okay? If then, okay, we can get up to there, you might need to grab something for balance here. You can see there, I nearly went. And if you can get that now, this here, now that's like really pulling on my quad. I can get into the position there. I can breathe in that position, which is always important. There's always like, you know, you can't breathe in a position, you don't really own it. You probably shouldn't be in that position. And if it's so tight, you're like, oh, Jesus Christ, I've got to hold my breath and all that lot. So as you can see here, I can just about get into all three positions here. Okay, so once you've discovered, okay, what is the limiting factor? Is it my hips? Is it my quads and stuff? Then you can start working on that. So generally, the way I would say approach it first is just to hit the quads anyway. Like you might as well when you're doing this routine. I find these two mobilizations partner up like perfectly together, okay? So the first one, we're going to use a roller, and what we're going to look to do is just remove some of that tension from the quads. Now, if you watched my last video, you would have seen that I've gone through like what a soft tissue mobilization is. We're essentially just trying to, you know, get the area feeling less sensitive, loosen up the muscles a little bit and just get things moving basically. And the movement that we're looking for here is basically like a heel to butt, keeping hip forward, heel to butt there, but we'll go through that in a minute. And then what I would do is start off with one leg up here, get yourself in like a plank position, pick an area, and all you're going to do is press into that, get the weight onto it, breathe in through your nose, give your quad a good squeeze into that area, you know, hold that for around 3 seconds and then just slowly relax off, okay? And you'll feel, so make sure it is slow. If you do it too sudden, you will feel it. Breathe in, contract, and then relax off. And then what you can do is you can start angling yourself like this if you want onto like a side plank position. You can come around to the side of your leg there. Breathe in, you can go up, you know, higher. You can go lower just above the knee. And what you want to do is spend a minute or two, you know, it's quite a big muscle. You might need more, like 2 minutes just to sort of like work on clearing up all the space in there, okay? So just, you know, you might find some areas are really tight and really sensitive. Say that's too much, go above it slightly. Loosen up, go below it slightly, loosen up, and then work your way back to that tense area. And just sometimes by, you know, loosening off the area around a really sort of tight spot, you can just feed some slack into the area and make it feel less sensitive as you approach it. Now that it doesn't feel so sensitive and we've loosened off a little bit, we're going to do again, we do some pressure waving. So I would say start like this, in like a side plank type position. You're going to basically go from a side plank to a plank and then back again. Yeah, nice and slow. Don't go fast. Just break through any sort of knots or lumps in there, whatever you want to call them. Sometimes it can feel a bit like bubble wrap I mentioned before. You just spend again like a minute or so just working through that area, okay? So you can see just come from there over to there, nice and simple, okay? Next up, I want to do a bit of flossing. So we're just into that position. I mentioned the heel to butt position before. So what we're going to do is come into there and bend in here. So obviously this is going to help with like knee function and stuff like that. So if you've got like really sort of like creaky knees or just a little bit of low level knee pain sometimes, like if your quads get tight and your knees hurt, then a good idea would be to loosen off your quads, you know, see if it stops. Quite often it can just, again, feed some slack into the knee joint, you know, maybe even work on the calves as well a little bit. Always a good idea to go above and below an area that's hurting, yeah? So once you loosen that up, that will start feeling a little bit better now. And then what you can do then is come back and use this as like, instead of a test this time, we're using it as a position there now, you know? That's feeling all right, that's good. Now if you struggle with that, you can just bring your knee away from the wall a little bit. You could even just come into there, get your hip fully extended. That's the important thing, yeah? If you're sitting there, tugging on it, feeling uncomfortable, it's not gonna send a signal to your brain saying like, okay, we're okay in this position, you know, just relax a little bit and let us ease into it. It's just gonna be, you know, you're just gonna feel tight and uncomfortable. So what we're gonna do, just come into there, bring that up, and like even just that, doing that a little bit of rolling there, I was only demoing it, that's even made my quad feel a little bit better there. And then once we're in that position, again, we can just use a little bit of like contract and relax again. So breathe in Squeeze the quad, squeeze the hip, squeeze the glute at the back. Breathe out, relax. See if you can push your hip forward a little bit more. Obviously, I'm going to take that so far. This is what you call like PNF stretching. So, or at least using concepts of it. I'm pushing forward. As a, I'm not really, with PNF, what we're looking for is like contract and get like a, get a response from the relaxation of it and really take advantage of that. Like obviously, there's only so far you can push your hip forward into there. And then if you wanted to, you come up into that next position there. Again, you might need something to balance on or something there. That doesn't feel great, it's not comfortable. I'm not going to get much out of it. If I feel too uncomfortable at first, you need to like ease yourself into these positions and work up to it and kind of earn the position really. So into there. So that's a few things you can do. So hopefully, you've got a better understanding of now, so at least some of the requirements of what's needed for a lunge or running or jerk, or what an archetype is, and almost, I'll go through the different ones over some other videos. But having that sort of bit of understanding and being able to break down a movement, like I said, and understand, okay, it's just the hip that's affecting that one part of the movement. It can make it quite easy to understand what it is exactly you need to work on, and carry on making progress. That's what it's all about, really.